I want to move to now is in time when history got changed once more. And that is when, if I may please, this is when the people called the Moors came out of North Africa and went into the lands that we now call the European countries. There was no European country that they did not touch. I repeat, there was no European country that they did not go into. The Moors, when they came out and invaded these portions of Europe, came out as both a peaceful and an army people. Let me explain that. There is a story about, is this the face that's launched 1,000 ships? And it is said to be of Helen of Troy. And it is stated that Paris, the young prince, takes an armada of people to bring her back because of her beauty and his love for her, and because of their love for the young Paris, these people followed him like mad. Well, that is a lot of mythology. What isn't a mythology has become worse than a mythology. It's not even a fairy tale. It's a forgotten page that turned about the history of Europe and the history of Africa. It is when a black princess that lived between the lands there of Morocco and of Libya was kidnapped by a German Teutonic captain, and armadas of men came in search of her, which led finally to an invasion by a very large army of mixed African peoples called the Moors. They were called the Moors because they came from Morocco in the name. The Moors of Morocco. The story of this kidnapped princess is one that has gotten buried in the annals of recent time, but was a story told ably in the 14th, 15th century, and was repeated into the 18th century, but then got lost. The Moors invaded most of Europe in 700 AD. The exact date they give is 705 to 706 AD. However, the Moors stayed in many of these lands for 40 and 50 years and left seeds there in the form of children, and their bloodline still is infused into many of the European peoples. The princess, and I want you to remember this because I doubt if you will hear this story anyplace else, and as in most of the classes that I give that are unique with the subject matter, I suggest you go research it, and if you find it to be a lie, or if you find it cannot be supported, or if you find that it is erroneous, please come back and tell me, because I will be the first one to try and change that part of it if it is so. This is a story of how Europe got its name. How Europe got its name. This princess that was kidnapped was a princess, again, Europa. Because of the love for Europa, and because of the wisdom and beauty of Europa, an entire so-called continent was named. The continent of Europe was named after a black woman. I repeat, the continent of Europe was named after a black woman, the Princess Europa. If you will check very closely into most of not only the Balkan states, but of the states west of the Ural Mountains, and again, you will find that they talk about Air Europa, not Air Europe, Air Europa. They still have European Airlines. And many of the globes and maps, the topographical ones that came out in the 60s and even the early 70s still carried Europe. And in fact, there was a time span when they superimposed the two letters. This went on for about 3 years, and then finally they dropped the A. You will sometimes see it written like this. Okay? And then they made a distinct change, dropping the A and changing it to E, and then they took off the A here. And you had Europe, for what once was called Europa. They still have many things throughout Batavia, and as I say, around the area of Austria, and so they're still called Europa, and they still have Air Europa Airlines. All the old maps carried this old spelling, and then when they changed it, the spelling would look like that. Named after a black woman. Win money on that one. I'm sorry, thank you. Europe and Europa. With the invasion of many of the areas of Europe, it was a strange invasion. There was some fighting, but it didn't last very long, and it was not because the people being invaded could not have put up a better fight. The Moroccan people that came there had so much more than these people in the form of gold, in the form of the way they dressed, in the form of knowledge. The science of algebra was brought into Europe by the Moors. The great cities of Cordoba and Granada were built in Portugal and Spain by them. The castles of Undar that were in La Bella that are found in Egypt were duplicated in much of the Moorish waste. And in fact, Europe is still draining. The so-called Moors of Scotland, these waste areas where there's quicksand and so on like this, were named because of their dark areas and because these people came ashore on these lands. They're called the Moors, man. There are many other things that were done which is easily traceable. Let's do it like this, forget it. In a book called Nature Knows No Color Line, again by J.B. Rogers, there are a set of pictures which I want to share with you. Rogers went over to Europe, and one of the things that is interesting about the Europeans is they believed in coats of arms. Coats of arms was a way that a family crest or a family symbol and the history of that family, what we call now the genealogy, could easily be traced by remembering their first prominent male ancestor. And from that, tracing from that year that that coat of arms was drawn, they each drew up some kind of way that represented a crest or that coat. And then it was usually sealed in wax or was some way or another preserved for time so that these people could understand their most prominent ancestor and the lineage that came after him, and it always was a male. The Moors from Morocco, North Africa, when they came into these lands, because they brought with them a higher culture and way of life, usually were fairly assimilated and people wanted to be with the Moors. This is very unique because in most cases of invasion, especially, the women resent the men that kill their men, resent the men that come in and take over indigenously and so on and so forth. But they had first come in for a while as traders, and then when this event happened and they actually began to spread throughout the land, there was very little resistance to them. And it's unique, but a true part of history. They come in again about 707, 705, 709, and they continue to believe. We say 705 and 706, but through that period of time. And they pretty much dominated and took over the governments of these people, or so influenced the education of it that it influenced the government of it. And they so enamored of these Moors that they changed whatever their family names were at this time to that showed that they had been influenced by the Moors. And their firstborn from that time on, they were happy to draw and show was of Moorish blood, which meant that then they had the possibility supposedly of being royal, esteemed, educated, intelligent, whatever it would be traced to what was called the symbology of the Moors. These coats of arms then bear the title of their first Moorish representative in the various lands. So, if you were Italian, and in Italy, again, the name for black was, or dark, was like negron, not negro, negron, which is like N-E-G-R-O-N. Negron was a form of way of saying black. So, and men were sometimes double consonants referred to some way or another a land of darkness or a place where dark pigment people came. So if your name was Negrona, Negroni, Saraceno, Pelongro, Pelogrona, Pellegrini, what are some of the words that they used there? Well, anything along this line, it meant that you had black ancestry or black blood from the line of the Moors. And they usually showed on the coats of arms the first Moor that produced seed in their family. And this was then shown on these coats of arms as their ancestor. If you were German, and I love to pick Germans because of the Hitler influence, where most people think of Aryan supremacy, and therefore through Adolf Hitler they think of blonde hair and blue eyes. Well, Aryan was not a race of people. There were no such things as Aryan or an Aryan race. Again, a misnomer. Aryan, that upper class. A Aryan supremacist, which is a double subject, is simply one who was an upper class of a person or of a neighborhood or of a people. These were the Aryans. Never was Aryan supposed to be a race looking blonde with blue eyes. It meant class, upper class of that hood, of that family, of that particular thing. And it is with the original, in fact, inhabitants of Hamburg, Germany, fled over the Netherlands and were dark-skinned Negroid people. The original Hamburgians were dark-skinned Negroid people. I didn't say African people because, as we will also see, that many of the people, and as we talked about in our first classes, many of the people on Earth that are dark-skinned did not originate in Africa in the main necessarily so. As this Negrito, as I told you about, was found everywhere. The word for dark in German, again, was Moor. And also, what's this other word? Schwarz. So if your name was either Moor, which was their way of saying Moor from Morocco, or Schwarz, which meant dark, or dark-hewn, or dark place, then this was their way of saying these dark peoples that had miscegenated into their line. So if your name was Moye, or Moninspector, or Moningspuch, or Schwarzman, or Schwarz, or Moninpunkt, Strathmore, any of these kind of things, it simply meant a way of saying black, or dark-skinned. It meant that these Germans had black blood. It's very interesting, one of the best built and strongest men in the world is Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he himself will tell you it means Schwarz, black plowman, that his ancestor somewhere was a black man. And that's very interesting too, if you look at some of his features, and he himself admits that that's what his name is, black plowman. Many Germans, and I've known many, one I got very close to, had less prejudice taught to them than we in America had taught to us. They were taught that the first people on Earth were black. This was from Kaiser Wilhelm on, from the First and Second Reichstag, really they call it Reich now, or rule, all the way to Hitler. And it was Adolf Hitler, through his Nazi party, which was a very right-wing, ultra-conservative party, that took in more the purists and the fanatics, along with these young men in the colleges and universities who needed something to bandy about, and put together this whole cloak and collage, which Hitler himself didn't believe in, because of course Hitler had blonde hair and blue eyes, didn't he? Didn't he?
No.
Oh, didn't he? Okay. By the way, that was not his name. Adolf Hitler's real name was Adolf Schicklgruber. Adolf Schicklgruber. He took the name Hitler after his astrologer, when his astrologer died. His astrologer was called Hitler, and he believed very much in astrology and in metaphysics. And he changed his name, Schicklgruber. Like a sickle and a grouper. Which means really one who grabs for the shekels. Money, currency, among some of the ancient so-called, well not ancient, so-called Jewish people. Money grabber, shekel grouper. Now, Hitler, of course, was the name of his astrologer. I don't know what Hitler means. If you were English and your name was Blackman, can't be any more expressive than that, can you? Now pronounced Blackman. Or your name was Morrison, son of a Moor. Moyen, child or children of a Moor. And on down the line. Many of the English names simply are based on the Moorish blood line that went into England through the Moors. If you were French, and your name was Murier, Morion, or one of the English, Italian names, Morelli, that's another one, Morelli, any of the Moors, not in it, and that's the English, French again, Moricund, and a very interesting one, Lenoir, which doesn't sound at all French, but is, the Lenoirs were a very rich, industrial black family in France, and in fact, much of France's industrial might came from the Lenoirs. Now, when you tell France that the reason why they have the technology now is because of the Lenoirs and black people coming from North Africa, some will understand it, some will never believe you, but it's all true. Again, like I say, you do research, and I think you'll find it may be true. The same thing with if you're Portuguese, your name was Azambule, or El Carde, or El Morin. It's the same thing again. It's a way of saying black. It's their way of referring to either black by complexion, or from their word for the Moors, or one of the cities that the Moors came from. And they were quite proud. In the book, make sure there's no color line, are page upon page of such scrolls. It even shows here Negroes, again from ancient Greece, and of course they use the word Negro here, but it shows again Malanus, the mother of Delphos, where we get our word melanin. And it shows again the black Greek mother of Delphos, and of course Delphos was one of the tributaries of the gods, or to the gods. And that's where we get our word melanin and Melanesian islands and so on. But to go into some of the coats of arms, tell me I can't find this because I want it. Okay, here are some of them. These are some of the ones from Germany, the coats of arms showing the black presence and the names that started in the year that this Moor or so was led into the black lines. And these are European coats of arms, look like almost a collage of from Africa, if you would. Here's one from, these are overall Germans there. Here's Central European. Here's one, German families again with Negro origin. Moritz is another one. Morowitz, I would say it's more. Guter Moritz, And this one has a cross, or what they call a mitre. This meant that he was a bishop. He'd been given the title of bishop, which meant, and a sword, which meant that he not only gave them spiritual values, but was a strong head of the family line that came from him. You can see all the lesser people that came after this particular one. Here is one that shows, again, German so-called Negroes. And one of the names here given is Della Scala. So if you are opera aficionados, per se, Della Scala, Nicodemus. Okay. So it's right here in the book. And when I say to people, if you just start reading just one writer, J. Rogers, you can get a wealth of knowledge. They still go off and by what everybody else tells them to write, because for many of the so-called educated Negroes, I call them that, they want to give you the scholars that their clique tells you to read. What I say, let's give deference and respect to a person who starts it first. And this man's books are on file, his bibliography is on file, his footnotes on file, and he says better through pictures, but most of them take a long time to say in most of his books. So why not go to a source that is complete? I feel J. Rogers is a very complete writer, and I'm not taking away from other writers. I just say he's better because he gets the point across. If you can't read, you can look at the pictures. Okay? And again, that comes from his book, Nature Knows No Government. When we also look at the whole concept of European history, we find that there are so many cross lines of melanin carrying capacity, or black skin, or black blood producing capacity, crossing into their family lines, and I want to use about 4 or 5, if you will. We hear about Hannibal, and we hear about Hannibal Hamlin, and we hear about the Hannibal of Carthage that crossed the Alps and came to the back door of Italy. But there was another namesake later. The year that I'm going to, not the one 217 BC, that Hannibal, but the year I'm going to use is 1750. You might want to jot that down. The year is 1750. And a Hannibal, again, called Abraham Hannibal, so you should be able to remember him easily, who was of African blood, or was of black blood, or a person carrying melanin, whichever you best choose with a Negroid, served as a general in the army in Tsarist Russia, which merely meant, like you would say, the pharaohs of Egypt, which I have my confused about that term pharaoh now too, as I do more research. But Tsarist Russia simply meant king Russia, ruler Russia. These were the head, the Tsars of Russia. This particular Abraham Hannibal had a son through a German white or Caucasoid woman that he married. And their offspring then were mixed bloods, if you would, but they were all considered to be Russians. Now, they had 5 sons. I'm not interested right now in the history of their sons. I'm interested in the one daughter that they had, who they named a very unique name, which therefore is easily traced. Her name was Nadija, or Nadija, N-A-D-E-J-D-A. This Nadija, or Nadija, if you would, married a count of Russia by the name of Pushkin, Count Pushkin. They had a son who they named Alexander. Alexander Pushkin became what is known now as the greatest poet, philosopher that Russia has known. He's the one that wrote Eugene Onegin. He's the one that wrote Boris Godunov, so on and so forth. And many people carrying melanin, Negroid people, will not go and see many operas because they feel, well, it's beneath them, or this has nothing to do with their people. This was written by a black man. Okay? Eugene Onegin, Boris Godunov, and within it tells you of the tale of the Moors, especially with Boris Godunov, and it tells you about the succession of kings and so on like that, hidden within this opera. But only discerned, of course, if you understand that he was a black bloodline and knew. Now, Nadija and Count Pushkin also had a daughter, and the daughter they named Sophie. She therefore was called Sophie Pushkin. Sophie Pushkin became the Countess of Mernberg, M-E-R-N-B-E-R-G. The Countess of Mernberg was Sophie Pushkin, the daughter of Nadija and Count Pushkin in Tsarist Russia. She married Prince Nicholas of Nassau. Prince Nicholas of Nassau. And when the prince was crowned and became therefore the king again, he married her, of course, as a prince. She was his wife as a king, and since he did not have status as a queen, she was simply called, again, a consort. This was the word that they used, C-O-N-S-O-R-T, a consort. They had a daughter by the name of Torby, T-O-R-B-Y. This Torby married the Grand Duke Michael of Russia, and Michael was brother to the Tsar, so it went into the highest royalty that Russia had. Michael and Torby had a daughter, and at the insistence of Torby, and they almost broke up their marriage with this because Michael definitely had a name for his daughter, which was not the name that Torby was insisting that her daughter be named, and since it was his daughter, they fell out about it. And it was a long time before this name was finally given, and it was given, and I want you to understand about black pride now, or about something about the uniqueness, either in Torby. She wanted her daughter to be named Nadija. That's why it's easily traced in history. She had it named after their ancient ancestor, one of the first in the black bloodline. And therefore, when this Nadija comes up again, almost 2 centuries later, it's easily traceable because the line has been carried on with the unique name of Nadija. This Nadija married Prince George Mountbatten. He was the second Marquis of Milford Haven, a grandson of Queen Victoria of the English royal family, and father of the Marquis of England until the late 1940s, and any bloodline from that, whether they be cousins or what, has black blood there, and now what is called the English royal family. One of Prince George of England's sisters married Tsar Nicholas of Russia, and this made them a Pushkin descendants, also a relative. There's a second interest into the British and French families. Of course, it already was in the Russian family. Cuba, C-O-U-B-A, Cornwallis, was a sweetheart for a very long time, and then later on married Admiral Sir William Cornwallis. Admiral Sir William Cornwallis was a brother of Lord Cornwallis, who was the head of the English Admiralty. He was the admiral of the entire English Navy and fleet. She was a black woman, and she later on saved the life of British Lord Nelson when he was attempted to be poisoned. It was her father that had a restaurant called Black Sam's, and it was there that they also did a lot of conspiring and meeting and so on and so forth again. Also, the first progenitor, the first royalty in the country of Sweden, and many of the black soldiers in World War II couldn't understand when they went to Holland and Sweden why they were treated so well, and they did abuse that privilege. But at one time, the black soldier in Sweden and Holland was treated like kings. Many of the black soldiers opened businesses there and owned huge tracts of land, and they thought it was because they were very unique. It was because they were very unique, but it was also because of the history of Sweden, which they didn't stop to study or hadn't been told. The first royal blood, the first progenitor in Sweden, was Queen Bernadotte. Queen Bernadotte. She was the daughter of an African woman from Morocco. She married a Caucasian Frenchman in the south of France, and they had 3 children. And on the frontispiece of Nature Knows No Color Line is what Rogers tried to show everybody to start their research with. Her name is Charlotte Sophia. Charlotte Sophia. She was consort, and consort means what? Or meant what? Nope. Made her to a king. And again, later George VI, to whom Queen Elizabeth of England is married. Therefore, there is black blood in Queen Elizabeth. Charlotte Sophia is a distant relative, her great-great-grandmother. He shows it in this book. Nobody reads it with understanding. And it should not be that much whether it is or not, because, as I've already stated, there are so many entranceways of people carrying melanin into the European peoples that it's ridiculous to talk about a pure anything anymore. Because where there is man and woman, there is mating. And where there is mating, there is infusion of blood. Unfortunately, with the hysterics of history, these things become horrendous crimes and begin things to be shoveled under the rugs, but the rugs are not deep enough. We also have been told that the African American and the people coming from the land of Kema, where's the land of Kema? Oh, I'm sorry, I meant Ethiopia. Where was once Ethiopia? Well, you people are crazy. The things that you said. Okay. One thing we've been told is that, and I'll include it with this one tonight, is that the many areas that the black man has entered into, the African American, the Negroid person, whichever term you best suit, has been into music, but it has been into the blues, into jazz, and now even into some of the contemporary things. But where the black man has not been strong has been in classical music. He has had operas written about him and has written operas, but he has not performed the music to these stories in the terms of classical composition and rhythm. And we're told, of course, that two of the most renowned, prolific classicists were Ludwig van Beethoven and Franz Joseph Haydn. Both of these men had black blood. Both of these men had Negroid women, either as great-grandmothers or as grandmothers. And it was the reason why Beethoven studied so much under Haydn, Joseph Haydn, was because of their mixed bloods and this common bloodline they felt they had, and this need for richness and proliferation of music, if you would. Neither of those now are classified as Beethoven, and if you see some of the anglicized, Coffinized, Europeanized portraits of Beethoven, of course, you would not see it. But again, in Sex and Race Volume 2 is a picture of Ludwig van Beethoven unretouched. And I think it was from a distant book, World's Great Men of Color, his grandmother showed in an inset. Haydn is more difficult to reach, but I have seen pictures, and I forget where now. But if you do the research, you'll find that his mother was of Negroid blood. All this is showing in this class is that Africa had a rich past long before Columbus, after Columbus, which was separate and distinct from anything developed on the European continent, but that the European continent developed as it did because of Africa's gift, not only to the Americas, but to the European continent, which was named after the Princess Europos. And it's open for questions and comments. Yes?
When you mentioned the war, the first thing that I thought about was Shakespeare's play Othello, which is black people wearing their honor, I believe. That was not, they did not have any classes about, I mean, it was very clear that he was black. But they did not have Shakespeare did not do a lot of writing about black. That was only something I remember.
Shakespeare is an interesting person within his own right. There is, I'm sure you've heard the story, the rumor, that there was no such person as Shakespeare, but that he was a pseudonym for a component of one of the fraternal brotherhoods who tried to bring enlightenment back to a people in a sneaky way, from which the church would not have stood there teaching these things straight out. And that most of the things, the reason why Shakespeare is considered, and is, if he is one man, he is indeed a genius is a code which I will share with you in our deeper metaphysical classes by which you can research how the name Shakespeare was gotten together. And it is from the Bible, and it is from Dey-Twah and Masonry combining one. But you have to know the code key in order to do it. That I won't drop on you until you get to the advanced classes in metaphysics. Everything here has a reason and base. It's just that those very thoughts and minds that you're supposed to read, they tell you not to read, or else they take the books and tell you that they don't exist, or they're called apocryphal. Okay, questions, statements, or comments? Oh, okay, I think I saw there, then front, brother in the middle, front, and then brother in the back.
We talked about the Moors going into Europe. You mentioned that took place 705.
Roughly, I think it's 705, 706, and I think some books list it as 709, but it's roughly about 705 to 706.
That's AD, right?
No. Oh, yes, yeah, Anderson. Okay.
I just wanted to make a mention that what we call the Arabian Peninsula in earlier times was Canaan. Would you agree with that?
The Arabian Peninsula was Canaan, the land of Canaan, Canaan land. I don't know. I'm not sure.
First, that Ethiopia, or what is called Abyssinia now, held the military and peoples were a part of this, what is now called Arabian Peninsula, up until the time of Prophet Muhammad, who went there for sanctuary. And after he couldn't convert the Ethiopians other than Bilal, they started to make a war that has lasted up until today, and they're still fighting in Yemen and Oman for the possession of that part of the peninsula.
And the Yemenites are definitely fighting. And I heard of the story of Bilal of the sons there, but did not know of the whole treatment. So I thank you for helping me to do some more research. Okay.
It seems that we talked about a lot of Africa, but not really the southernmost tip of Africa. At least I may have missed it. In talking about geography, is I guess proposed that at one time South America and Africa may have been one continent. Is there anything in the history that sheds more light on that? And you mentioned masonry quite a bit. Is there any black history and connection with that?
Let me answer the first one last. I feel so, yes. Outside of the Prince Hall in prison to General Gage, there's deep, I feel, black history in masonry. And the second part, were the Americas one? Is that what you stated? Or asked? Were you asking or making a
I was
statement?
asking.
I don't think so. You mean North and South America?
No. South America and Africa.
Oh, okay, not the Americas and America and Africa one. I don't believe so again. There are some who try to fit the bonnet with the tail and say that these therefore drifted, with of course comes the continuum displacement tektite theory and glacial shift. I don't believe so. Only not because it doesn't make sense and not because of looking at it doesn't look fine, but when they have actually sampled the rock strata off the west coast of Africa and the east coast of the Americas, they found some of it just doesn't have different type. There is a common bond on any ocean that has land masses around it of the type of things that drifted on both shores. But the rock strata itself was not in the main up there. Many people were forced, I feel, forced an amalgamation of these two. But even stronger than that is just a strong belief in metaphysics. And metaphysics has a different explanation for the space now and the oceans between Africa and America. So I say about 30% based on supposedly the findings that just don't quite corroborate all that rock strata, and 70% just on a belief and binding faith in metaphysics.
How did you explain the Negroid people down in South America, North Coast?
That's next week. Yeah, I've got some pictures. They found them in Peru, and they found them again buried in some of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings at Luxor. They found them in the castles of Valhalla. They have found them and again, in Dey-Twah city, right there in Nubia. And you can't get more, I don't say more ancient, but you just can't get any blacker than that. And each time they're found, they're called birds. And they're called kas, which is degradation for the spiritual values of ancient Africa, but nevertheless they are simply called collections of birds. And in our metaphysical classes, again, it's not a reference tonight to metaphysics, but when you start talking about swept-wing, delta-wing aircraft in ancient history, you're talking metaphysics, obviously, because they tell you ain't no such thing, because there were no right birds. But simply, if you look at them and see some of these casement archaeological tag digs that show birds, they are some of the weirdest looking fuselage, tail bending, cockpit welding birds you ever want to see. And many of them have some very strange shapes, even outside of the delta wing tag.
Yeah. But in referring to this picture here, I was reading that Circle's book, Blacks in Science, and he did have the same pictures, but he also went ahead to mention that they have been developments in terms of the construction of a prototype that actually flew when given a certain inertia as a glider. So the dimensions are not arbitrary. They were properly chosen because they are prototypes that actually flew when given the thrust of inertia.
Okay, I have no argument with that whatsoever. I would propound it and simply state that if you read some of the ancient texts from lands where the people say, hey, this book is real, the Indian Mahabharata and the Upanishads, which are as strong to them as, say, the Christian belief in the commandments, or the Jewish Talmudic belief in the Torah, or the Testament of Truth. They are as sacred to them in the Upanishads and the lands of the Vedas in the Mahabharata, and they speak of flying ships called Zenlas, and they speak of the stories of Armanya and his bride, Ramanya and Marmanya, and they're chased by a guy who flies across the sky after them, and not, of course, with celestial wings either. If you read some of the writings of the Papuva amongst the Mesquite and Muscaderos in their ancient book, and they talk of flight. If you read the treatises under Shabaka in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and he talks in terms of flight and craft. So it is only the European mind that states that men did not fly prior to the Wright brothers. You even remember in the treatises on the 1001 Nights, which is a very metaphysical assemblage of stories, it talks about the flying carpets. And the carpets you'll find were not carpets not like the Persian rugs that people get on. They were actually some very interesting type of carpets flying across there. Some of these carpets seem to have puffs of smoke coming from them, and so on and so forth. So I simply state that idea of flight, like as we talked about yesterday, off at Bell, the idea of batteries and electricity is nothing new. When Memphis was lit up, and Knossos was lit up, and Baghdad was lit up, but they hide all of this. So once you hide, then when you reread it, it becomes, wow, did you ever hear this? But those are the books they tell you, don't read those books. Those books are metaphysical. They are occult. And you're right, you should read every piece of occult literature you can. You may not have to believe it, but occult simply means what? Hidden. And that's where you need to start writing. Anything that's hidden that somebody else reads, you should read too, because there must be some reason they hide it.
You also indicate that there are tapes here about journalists and UFOs. And I just want to make a comment about that. I was looking at my time one night, and there were interviews with somebody who claimed to have had a sighting. And one of the first things he said was that there were some things that appearing like Egyptian hieroglyphics on the UFO itself. This is coming from a apparently very innocent observer who I don't think it meant anything to him, but so I don't think he was making it up. Do you have any comment on that?
Only that's really a different question for a Black History class, which is taking a strange metaphysical tangent, which I love, but understand how you brought in and inflected, not just you, but the way you inflected this metaphysical bit now. I didn't inject metaphysics into Black history, which I try to keep separate. Since you spoke to it, and since I love metaphysics, I'm not going to dodge it. The word hieroglyph, of course, means sacred writing, or writings of the gods. The petroglyphs were those that men wrote, not trying to pay homage to the gods or duplicate the writings of the gods. And in the petroglyphs, of course, in the hieroglyphs, in Tutankhamun's tomb, in Ramesses, in Nebuchadnezzar, in which was this other, the one that had a lot of the Syrian, Osiris, Osiris, and a rule of Thothmes. They had what happened in the heavens and what happens on earth. And they always show these winged creatures, these winged pyramids, and what they call Litre, as their way they break it down now, light liteers, or these flying lights. And they have been found in the tombs, of course. And of course, the most recent rumor, when they had this big computer that they took over there, taking over 1 million photographs over a year, trying to find out secret passageways or secret compartments or areas in the tomb based on radiation, where, they bombarded it again, and with a hollow space that would show up on the graph. Not only did they find that the pyramid changed its shape every 72 hours, its density mass, which is a physical impossibility on our basic physics, but they also supposedly found the outline of something that may have been beneath the pyramid, and now the rumor is that they may have found a spacecraft beneath the pyramid of Khufu. That is a rumor. They definitely have not stated that and released that in broad circles. So the rumors persist and bound about UFOs, if you would, but in our metaphysical classes we get into them pretty deeply. Oh, they say they know. I have a whole class again in metaphysics on pyramids. And all I can say is they say they know exactly how they were built. By whom and how long. Oh, they even introduced what is called the British Pyramid Edge. They know exactly how it is and what prophecies it is and how it is and the whole bit. And all of it can be torn completely apart. It's just a way of looking at it, and another way it can be looked at the same way. Okay, questions, statements, and comments as we must wind down now. If there are any burning ones, please share them. If they're not, then that is kind of complete. All right, this was our 4th class. We have 2 more classes in Black history. Next week will be our 5th class, and next week we will get into some of the things that they have found now and the history that is being taught now of what may have been the ancient Americas, including the Olmecs, including the mound builders, including some of the things that they said about Cortez and Montezuma, many of the tribes, so-called, the nations that were here, and just a whole different perspective. And when you begin to see some of the so-called mounds and some of the so-called Indian settlements, and then I show you what restored these Indian settlements may have looked like, you're probably going to say again, we better go back and blow our minds, because it's quite interesting. Yeah. We live on a very interesting planet, because we have a very interesting way of studying it. Thank you very much. May the Creator bless you. Also, too, if you remember, I do have the tapes today. The police have been very busy. You say you want them. They're now available. We have last week's class on Nubia, Egypt, which is available on a double cassette at 1250. It's 2 different cassette tapes, close to 180 minutes. And we do have the one where Dr. Fulton was here, the one on cancer, and a whole look at cancer, its cures, and its possibilities, and in her statements to us. Also, hope you would begin to listen to our show on Opinion. It's called Opinion on WBEE, Saturday mornings at 9. We've got a wang-dangy-doo of a know you're gonna love it and